As we look at skin and membranes, we'll be looking at our first organs and our first organ system. Organs are structures that are composed of two or more tissues. These two tissues work together to contribute to producing a similar function. The membranes we're going to talk about are simple organs. There are only two tissue types, so they're the simplest of organs. An organ system will contain two or more organs. These organs will work together to perform a similar function. The first system we're going to look at is the integumentary system, or the skin. The skin itself is part of the integumentary system. It is also called the cutaneous membrane. Because this has to be made of two different tissue types, we have the epidermis, which is composed of stratified squamous epithelium, and the dermis, which is composed of connective tissue. The integumentary system is composed of the cutaneous membrane and then the appendages. These are the other organs of the integumentary system. We have the sudoriferous or sweat glands. We have the sebaceous glands or the oil glands. We have hair, and associated with the hair follicles is a muscle called the erector pili muscle, and then we have the nails. As we look at this cross section of the skin, we have the epithelial tissue here. We have the connective tissue here. This is the cutaneous membrane, and this is one of the organs of the system, the epidermis and the dermis. We have a hair follicle. This is composed of epithelial and connective tissue, and there's some nervous tissue here. And here we see part of an oil gland, which again is epithelial and connective tissue. So while these structures are relatively simple, they are still all organs of the integumentary system. The epidermis is the outer layer of the skin. This is the stratified squamous epithelium. The epidermis is composed of 4 to 5 different cellular layers. The outermost layer is known as the stratum corneum. These cells are all dead. They have been infused with a protein called keratin, so they're called keratinized cells. Keratin makes the cells waterproof and very, very tough. Because the cells are dead, they flake off very easily. This means when you bump into something, instead of making a big tear in your skin, you just shed a few cells on that surface. So skin is protective. The innermost layer of the epidermis is called the stratum basale or the stratum germinativum. These are the cells that are actively dividing cells. It's the function of these cells to keep replacing those cells that are lost on the surface. The layers in between the stratum corneum and the stratum germinativum have cells going through different processes to become those dead keratinized cells. Here you see a cross-section through the skin, a picture, and an actual microscopic structure. The outer layer is 30 or so layers of these dead keratinized squamous epithelial cells. This is the stratum corneum. These cells are all dead. Here at the very bottom is your stratum basale. These are the cells that are actively undergoing mitosis. You see them here on the microscope slide. And these layers in between, the cells are going through changes, forming keratin, becoming more keratinized, and eventually becoming so keratinized that they die. The dermis is the connective tissue layer of the cutaneous membrane. It's divided into two regions. The papillary layer is the thin upper layer of the dermis closest to the stratum basale. It has uneven finger-like projections that are called the dermal papillae. This is what makes your fingerprints. The epithelial tissue folds along this, and this gives you ridges on the surface of your skin. The reticular layer is a dense, irregular connective tissue. That means that we have a lot of collagen fibers packed in there, all at different angles to each other. It makes for a very stretchy but tough hide underneath your epidermis. It is the reticular layer that contains the blood vessels, the glands, and the pressure receptors. The epidermis here, and then here is your dermis from this point on. This little loose connective tissue with the little dermal papillae would be the papillary layer, and it's not very thick. Most of the dermis is this heavier, fiber-packed reticular layer, and you can see glands and pressure receptors, and that's a blood vessel. Another of the organs of the integumentary system are the sebaceous glands. These glands produce oil, so these are your oil glands. They are found nearly everywhere on your body. They're associated with hair follicles, so there are a few places on your body where you don't have hair, most noticeably the soles of your feet and the palms of your hand. That's why these areas of your body tend to get dry very easily. There are no oil glands there. The oil acts as a lubricant. The surface of your skin, remember, is all dead cells, and the shaft of your hair is also dead cells. This oil acts to keep them pliable. Yes, they will shed, hair will break, but it keeps it from happening too quickly. The oil glands are associated with hair follicles. So these little bags right here are your oil glands. And when we look at them on a microscope slide, we have these epithelial cells, squamous epithelial cells, and they've got a connective tissue that surrounds them that holds them in place. So two different tissue types, a very simple organ. They dump the oil into the hair follicle, and it is distributed along the shaft of the hair as well as spreading out on the surface of the skin. This keeps these dead cells pliable so that they don't break or shed too quickly. The sudoriferous or sweat glands are also one of the glands of the integumentary system. Now, you've got sebaceous and sudoriferous, and it's kind of like, okay, how do I keep these words straight? Well, if you think about there's odor, sudoriferous, you hear that odor in there, and sweat smells bad. So the sudoriferous glands, the ones that have odor in them, are the sweat glands. You have two kinds of sweat glands. The eccrine glands are the most common. They're distributed everywhere on your body. They produce what you think of as sweat, that clear perspiration that's mostly water and salt and a little urea. These glands are active pretty much throughout life. They kick in when you're about 2 months old and they work for the rest of your life. This is the sweat that cools your body. So this is the air conditioning system of your body. The apocrine glands are a little more specialized. They're found only in the axilla and the genital areas. In addition to producing the watery sweat, they also stick in that sweat this milky, protein and fat-rich secretion. So that sweat is a little different looking. These become active at puberty. Because of the extra protein and fat that's in this sweat, microorganisms can use this as a food source, and the byproducts they make smell bad. So this is the sweat that's the stinky sweat. These are eccrine glands. These are the coiled tubes, and they have a tube that comes up to the surface. So they let the sweat out on the surface of the skin. This is what they look like when you cut across them. These are simple cuboidal cells surrounded by, again, some connective tissue, so very simple organs, but organs nonetheless. These cells produce that clear kind of watery sweat. As that comes up on the surface of the skin and evaporates, this is what cools you. The hair is composed of a hair follicle. The hair follicle has the root of the hair as well as the shaft of the hair in it. The cells at the root of the hair are the ones that are undergoing active cell division. And then, sort of like on the skin, those cells become keratinized, and as those cells are pushed away from that area where the cell division is going on, they become dead. So your hair is really dead, protein-containing kinds of epithelial cells. Those cells of the hair shaft are dead, just like the cells of the stratum corneum. Hair is found distributed all over your body except the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, around your nipples, on your lips, and on parts of your external genitalia. Hair has a protective function. One of the things it does is it helps conserve heat. Associated with the hair follicle is a smooth muscle known as the erector pili. This muscle is attached to the base of each hair follicle and then to the papillary layer of the dermis. During stress, this contracts. Now, fear is stressful. Being cold is stressful. As this muscle contracts, it's going to pull the hair follicle up toward the skin and make it kind of bulge outward. This is what gives you goosebumps. So here you see the sebaceous gland associated with the hair follicle. Here's one of those sudoriferous or sweat glands. And here is your hair follicle. Again, we've got connective tissue surrounding it. We have those base cells that are actively dividing here in the root. And then those cells become keratinized. They get that waterproofing protein. They die, and as they're pushed forward, you have this dead shaft of cells here. The erector pili muscle is connected to the root of the hair follicle and the papillary layer of the dermis. When this shortens, it's going to pull the hair follicle up, and you're going to have a little bump on your skin right there where your hair follicle is. That's going to be goose flesh. The body membranes are all simple organs. They're composed of an epithelial layer and a connective tissue layer. There are three epithelial membranes: the cutaneous membrane, which makes up the skin, the mucous membranes, which secrete mucus, and the serous membranes, which secrete serous fluid. The cutaneous membrane we've already talked about. This is your skin. It's composed of stratified squamous epithelium and dense irregular connective tissue. We call this a dry membrane. It's exposed to the air and it covers the surface of the body. It's a protective kind of membrane. The skin is very tough and it protects you from things coming in from the outside. It's waterproof, so water doesn't get in or out of the body easily. And then because it's so tough, it's hard for anything to penetrate it. The second type of epithelial membrane are the mucous membranes. These are sometimes called the mucosa. They also are composed of an epithelial layer. They have a simple epithelium, which may be squamous, cuboidal, columnar, or pseudocolumnar. And then there is a thin, loose connective tissue layer underneath that. Usually this is one of those areolar tissues, one of those post-it note kinds of tissues. We find this membrane lining body cavities that have natural openings to the outside. So your digestive system, respiratory system, reproductive system, and urinary system are all lined with mucous membranes. These are considered wet membranes. They secrete mucus, which keeps the membrane moist, and sometimes they are bathed in other body secretions, like urine in the urinary system or digestive juices in the digestive system. So here you see a couple of the mucous membranes, the one that lines the respiratory system and the one that lines the entire digestive system. Not shown here are the reproductive and urinary systems, which are also lined with mucous membranes. Serous membranes, or serosa, are the third type of epithelial membrane. They too are a simple squamous epithelium over a loose connective tissue, usually an areolar connective tissue. These membranes line closed body cavities that do not have a natural opening to the outside. And there are three different ones. The thoracic cavity is lined with the pleura, the abdominal cavity is lined with the peritoneum, and there is a sac that surrounds the heart that is lined with the pericardium. All of these membranes secrete serous fluids which act as a lubricant for the organs inside the body cavity. It allows the organs in the body cavity to move freely so that they function appropriately. The pleura makes pleural fluid, the peritoneum makes peritoneal fluid, and the pericardium makes pericardial fluid. And here you see the three serous membranes. We have the pleura, and it lines the thoracic cavity, and all of the serous membranes fold back on themselves and cover the organs underneath. And this little space is where the fluid is. So as you breathe, for example, the pleural fluid between these two layers would allow the lungs to move freely against the chest wall. Here is the pericardium, the sac that surrounds the heart, and again you have the outside, and then the pericardium folds back and covers the heart directly, and the pericardial fluid is in this space. As the heart beats, it moves freely within this sac. And the peritoneum lines the abdominal cavity and then comes out and covers all of the organs, the digestive organs in this cavity. Again, so these organs can move freely. We talked about this region being the abdominopelvic region. The peritoneum is what divides the abdominal part of that from the pelvic part of that. The pelvic cavity is not lined by any kind of serous membrane. There is another kind of membrane called the synovial membrane. Now the synovial membrane is not a true organ because it's composed entirely of connective tissue, but there are several different kinds of connective tissue, and more than one kind of connective tissue makes up a synovial membrane. We find the synovial membranes lining joint cavities, and they also make up bursa and tendon sheaths, which help lubricate around the joints. The synovial membranes secrete synovial fluid, again, a fluid that acts as a lubricant. So here you see the different places we have synovial membranes. Here is a joint cavity, two bones coming together, and the synovial membrane here secretes fluid that helps the bones move freely in this joint. Then we have bursa, which are little bags made of a synovial membrane that have synovial fluid in them, and these can act as ball bearings around joints so that ligaments and bones move freely across each other when we try to move these objects. And sometimes we have a bursa kind of structure, a long one, that will actually wrap itself around a tendon. These are called tendon sheaths. And again, they help pad the tendon and allow it to move freely in the area of the joint.